Bayard Rustin quite possibly may be the most influential person in the civil rights era that you've never heard of. And he was denied his place in the limelight for one reason alone: he was gay. Bayard was the chief architect of the March on Washington, where Martin Luther King gave his iconic "I Have a Dream" speech, and he was an openly gay black man. He was sometimes referred to as Mr. March on Washington, special advisor to Martin Luther King, and he organized a large number of key movements and organizations throughout the civil rights era, including the Freedom Rides, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and of course, the March on Washington. Bayard gave us over 60 years of activism with almost every major event from the 40s to the 70s he played a role in.
I want no human being to die or to be brutalized, because I thoroughly believe that this struggle can be won without brutalization. We will not tolerate the beating hold of black people any longer. We will stay in these damn streets until every Negro in the country can vote. We call for a non-violent uprising with people sitting, standing, being arrested, white and black together. We have been told that we will be arrested if we stay here. That segregation be ended in every school district in the year 1963. We need in every community a group of angelic troublemakers. The only weapon we have is our bodies, and we need to tuck them in places so wheels don't turn.
So Rustin was born in 1912, Westchester, Pennsylvania, but he was raised by his grandparents, growing up believing his biological mother was actually his older sister. His grandparents were relatively wealthy, and his grandmother, Julia Rustin, was a member of the NAACP, and she invited members such as W.E.B. Du Bois and James Weldon Johnson into their home. And this was a significant influence on Rustin during the Jim Crow era. As a child, he realized that he preferred to spend time with males rather than females. And he mentioned this to his grandmother. She responded, "Then I suppose that's what you need to do." Later in life, in 1953, he was arrested in California after he was discovered having sex with a man. He served 50 days in jail and was registered as a sex offender. But this was ultimately the reason he was forced into a less prominent role in the civil rights movement. It was unfortunate. I wanted to point out that in 1942, about a decade before Rosa Parks, Rustin made a decision to protest Jim Crow laws requiring black people to sit in the back of buses. He said, "As I was going by the second seat, to go to the rear, a white child reached out for the ring necktie I was wearing and pulled it. Whereupon his mother said, 'Don't touch a N-word.' Rustin said to himself, 'If I go and sit quietly at the back of the bus now, that child who was so innocent of race relations, it was going to play with me, it was choosing to play with me. It will have seen so many blacks go in the back and sit quietly that it's going to end up saying they like it back there, and never seen anybody protest against it. I owe it to that child, not only to my own dignity, I owe it to that child that it should be educated to know that blacks do not want to sit in the back.' He sat down in the front, police were called, and he was subsequently beaten and released, no charges filed." Sound familiar?
Yeah.
He also said, "It occurred to me shortly after that it was an absolute necessity for me to declare homosexuality. Because if I didn't, I was part of the prejudice. I was aiding and abetting the prejudice that was part of the effort to destroy me." Now, he continued his struggle against racism and prejudice, and in 1956 took a role as an advisor to Martin Luther King, and is considered to have heavily influenced Martin Luther King's nonviolent approach. MLK was working on organizing the bus boycott in Montgomery, Alabama, and Rustin became began advising him on Gandhian tactics. According to Rustin, he says, I think it's fair to say that Dr. King's nonviolent view of tactics was almost non-existent when the boycott began. Dr. King was permitting himself and his children and his home to be protected by guns. Rustin convinced King to abandon the armed protection, including a personal handgun. One of the other ideologies Rustin was believed to have influenced was based on his own belief that a social movement has to be based on the collective needs of people, regardless of color, creed, or race, an ideal that was significant in King's speech. Bayard worked tirelessly in an endless list of civil rights, working for refugees and Asian Americans, gay rights, basic human rights. And at the time of his death, even at the time of his death, he was on a humanitarian mission in Haiti. After his death, President Ronald Reagan praised him, and on November 12, 2013, President Obama posthumously awarded Rustin the Presidential Medal of Freedom.
Oh, wow.
Yep. We argued that Rustin affected more change than any other leader of his time. So,
Wow.
yeah, amazing.
Thank you.
Very impressive.
I tell you, no, it's no telling what he could have done if he,
Didn't claim.
if he wasn't living in a time where it was such a terrible thing to be a gay black man. So
Exactly.
Right? Because he would have been vilified by all segments at
Yeah.
that point.
Yeah.
Wow. That's
Yep.
awful. But I really love his grandmother's response.
yeah,
Then I guess that's what you should
you gotta
do.
do.
Right.
You do what you got to do.
So I mean, that's
That's
really
very
awesome. I
progressive.
mean, yeah,
True.
it was very progressive for the time, for sure. So, all right.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. Yeah. Jacqueline Robinson online says, I wasn't aware of him until I saw an HBO movie called Boycott. Yeah. I wasn't aware of him at all either, actually, until recently. I was just looking up some things on Black History Month, and I saw his name come up, and I was like, who is this guy? And then I'm like, man, he was integral. He was very integral
Yes.
in the movement.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Amazing that we hadn't heard about him. Had you heard about him, Gianni?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
And even the fact that you said he influenced the ideology, Martin Luther King's ideology, that's
Of
very,
nonviolence.
it makes
Mhm.
sense that it would
Mhm.
surpass just race. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's a person, a human level. That makes sense because
Yeah.
he was treated unfairly even past just being black.
I mean,
Mhm.
and even
I
later in
respect
life, he was really important in the gay rights movement as well.
Wow.
Yeah. So he was
Wow.
he was integral.